go into what became called the center of New Hampshire. And when we went in and occupied all that space for our show, they were still under construction. There were piles of building materials that we had to walk around, and saws and equipment were here and there and everything, but they were able to accommodate us, and we got the thing going. But anyway, well, we're going to solve the problem of a venue, and it was a pretty good arrangement from everything we could tell, and it was actually better than what they had in Montpelier, and better than what they had in Augusta, so we're off and running. Well, how are we going to do this? So first thing we did was we formed a board and organized ourselves as a not-for-profit charity, I guess you'd call it, organized under New Hampshire law. And the initial board of directors consisted of Zib Carell, and we made her the chairman of the board. She's kind of the person who, she was an employee of the Department of Agriculture engaged in marketing activities, but she would be kind of the point person as we pulled all these multiple assortment of details together. And then we got a couple of, we needed co-sponsorship, and that was right off, very important that we do that. And so we turned to UNH Cooperative Extension, and since we're going to call it, we chose as a name the Farm and Forest Exposition, because we wanted to have the outdoor economic engines of agriculture and forestry together. And so turn to first to Extension, because they're in agriculture, they're in family life, they're in youth activities, and they're in forest. And Peter Horn was the head of Extension at that time, and he said, hey, that's a pretty good idea. And he had to take it up through the chain of command to get the presidents on board, and everybody said, okay, sounds good, a little skeptical, but we'll see what you can do. And then the forest community, first we turned to the Division of Forests and Lands, and Ted Natty was the state forester at that time, head of that outfit, and he was very enthusiastic. He came on board. And so there we had that three-part community of leadership. And from those three communities, we drew, well, first of all, from the Department of Agriculture, we had Zib Carell, and I was on the board. And then from Extension, we turned to John Porter, Extension Dairy Specialist, and then from the Forest Agency, J.B. Cullen, he was one of their foresters and a key part of us. And then we went to John Condy. John Condy was a consulting forester, and he'd worked for Extension, and he came in. Then we wanted to make sure we had the commercial exhibitors that we were going to be approaching represented. So we got a guy named Dwight Brown. He owned an International Harvester dealership at the time. It was down in Epping, and we got him on board, and we made him the treasurer. And Dwight was just a wonderful contributor. And with Dwight, you got a twofer, because his wife came along too, and she was a worker bee and really helped us. And then we had a guy named Bill Jordan, and he was the farm manager at the New Hampshire State Prison. And early on, he was a big help. So anyway, we started meeting, started organizing, dreaming about what we ought to have in the show, and all these things. We're starting to come together, really. But we need some money, and we don't have any money. We're starting at zero. And so I got the idea of calling up Lou Feldstein, who ran the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation at the time. And I said, Lou, we're trying to do something for agriculture and the rural community of New Hampshire. Can you help us? We just need a little bit of money for seed money, because we had to make a deposit on that facility in Manchester. We had to put up some earnest money to say, yeah, we're going to be there. And so he found $5,000. and he said, okay, I can grant you $5,000 from some of the advised funds that they manage over there. And he said, I think I'll loan you $5,000 out of a discretionary fund that I got kind of as working capital for you or whatever. Anyway, it was all kind of complicated, but we got it done. So we had some money. And so then we're ready to go, move ahead with planning what we're going to have for programming. And then we start approaching our community of exhibitors, the equipment dealers, the service providers, the feed companies, all these different people that would have something to say to visitors to the show. And we asked them to make a deposit. So that got us some money coming in. And then we were off and running, really. We had basically, in doing all this, we said, we got 3 goals that we want here to to aspire to. Number 1 was education, to inform and to bring experts who can speak on specific topics related to agriculture, to forestry, to conservation, those kinds of things. Well, there's just so many people that are great resources in that area to draw on. And so we're able to really fashion some really good programming right off the bat and have those that we could list off. And we turned to U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Soil Conservation Service. They have resources, people like the Forest Society, New Hampshire Farm Bureau, all kinds of different entities they were really bought in on this. They liked this idea and they wanted to be a part of it. So it was great. And another thing we did right there on the education part was is that we weren't solely focused on professional loggers and sawmillers and the forest industry along that way, nor were we just focused on commercial farms like big dairy farms or big orchards. We wanted also to be a place where consumers or the general public could come and learn about what was going on farms and in the forests of New Hampshire. And so we've always had that, and it's always been good, that the consumer focus is quite different from what they do in Maine and Vermont. And I think it's been a real nice attribute of the Expo all down through the years. You know, the backyard gardeners, we want to speak to them as well as the people that are planting 500 or 600 acres of corn for feeding cows. So there's something there for everybody, and that's held up really well. And then we want to facilitate, well, you could call it commerce or business activity. So we want people who are selling technology, tractors, chainsaws, woods equipment, all kinds of tools that you use in agriculture and forestry. And those people lined up and said, we're coming, we'll be there. And then organizations that serve agriculture and forestry, we got them in too. And that gave a kind of an eclectic mix of exhibitors on potential. Then we wanted to have a social dimension because in the middle of the winter, a lot of us have got cabin fever, and we're going to bring people together. We want them to have a good time. We want to have plenty of time for getting to know other folks or chatting or seeing old friends come together and talk about whatever. And so we we had a whole bunch of different things that we threw in there. One that I was always incredibly fond of was an ice cream booth. And Weeks Dairy at the time, they supported it, and 4-H partnered. And we had ice cream, these great big bowls of ice cream that you had, I think, for 25 cents or 50 cents. And people just loved that, and a place to sit down and visit and eat ice cream. And that was a super hit. And we had plenty of places. People just, how agriculture people are, forest people are, they're garrulous, they love to talk, and it just fed on itself. We did And we also put in a dinner, a banquet. It was a pretty ambitious undertaking, but boy, we sold out. I think we had 250 people come that very first one. And we need some kind of entertainment or something, kind of hype this thing up. And I turned to Peter Thompson. Peter was the head of the Farm Service Agency in New Hampshire for USDA. And he called down to Washington and he got an undersecretary of agriculture to come up. And it was a guy named Wilmer Vinegar Bend Mizell. And he had been a pitcher with the St. Louis Cardinals. And he came up and he gave a hilarious talk. And everybody, you know, you got a real kick out of meeting the real Vinegar Bend, a legend from the 60s in baseball. But he had the touch and he understood farmers and agriculture and what they wanted to hear. The next thing we need to do is to build awareness that we were going to do this thing. And we started off with get articles in the farm newspapers. We got, we talked about it in the weekly market bulletin, the Department of Agriculture's publication. We'd say this is going to happen. And these are some of the things that we're expecting to include. And all of our commodity groups, foresters organizations, everybody started putting notices in their newsletters, their publications, and talking it up at their meetings. And so that was good. In early January, we put out a brochure that had all the programming and the list of the exhibitors that we were expecting to be on hand. And we got that all over the place. We put those things in feed stores and extension offices, wherever we thought potential attendees would be able to get it. And so we did that. The last 2 weeks, we squeezed out a few dollars we bought a few spots on Channel 9 in Manchester. And we bought what they call a sweep, I guess, or a suite. I always thought it was a suite of ads on WOKQ, which at the time was a big dominant station. Oh, it still is, but it was a country music format, but it was a 50,000 watt station that reached better than 3/4 of the population of the state of New Hampshire. And they really stepped up and supported us. They came on the first day of the show. They did a remote, they broadcast from there, and that, you know, that helped hype the thing. Channel 9 sent a film crew on our first day to, you know, I think they highlighted maybe it was a baby calf and some 4-H'ers and things like that. And so it was on the evening news. So people at home saw, hey, wait a minute, there's something we ought to go to. And also the newspaper, particularly the Manchester Union newspaper, they gave us some good coverage so that it, you know, from the first day it showed up in the next morning's paper, and that got broadcast all around the state. So, you know, getting that attention, get people talking, get the buzz, as they say, that was critical, I think. We were going to make sure that some people are going to show up. We promised a lot, and are people going to respond? Well, as it turned out, they did show up, and it was beyond our expectations. But people really knocked themselves out to have good exhibits. And I particularly remember the New Hampshire fruit growers. I think they took 2 or 3 exhibit stalls, and they made this display of apples, and they gave away apples. And you couldn't believe the people crowded around. They wanted to get an apple, but here's this beautiful array of all different varieties of apples and beautiful posters and all that kind of thing. You know, really. And many of the other exhibitors, they knocked themselves out to do a great job. We found that people really enjoyed it. And I was surprised right off the bat. You didn't see some people I knew from Vermont, you know. And I said, wait a minute, you know, a guy from way up north. I said, what are you doing here? How come you came play down? He said, geez, we heard about your thing. We read about it in the New England Country Folks, or, you know, some farm paper. and sounded like it was real different. It isn't just manure spreaders and gutter cleaners and that kind of thing. You've got some interesting stuff there too. You're talking about cropping, and you're talking about good ways to dry if cordwood and things like that. That's different. And so we were drawing from eastern Vermont, and of course all over New Hampshire, and a few folks from York County, Maine were coming over. But then out of eastern Massachusetts, we had a whole bunch of people come, and this was wonderful. Now, bear in mind, in those early years, we didn't charge any admission. This all was free to the public, and I think that helped us really, crank it up, get it going, and it surprised a lot of people. Well, now we had invited the governor and the executive council people and the state senators and the politicians, and make sure they knew what we were doing, and y'all come. And I do remember John Sununu Sr. Was the governor at the time, and he came down, he came in. I remember talking to him, I greeted him, and he said, gee, I thought this was going to be a little intimate gathering. And, there were hundreds of people milling around and going through, and he walked through, and ooh, this is way bigger than what he expected. And I think that, among other things, was a good outcome in terms of raising the awareness of all the good stuff that was going on in agriculture and forestry at the time, and got them more aware of what's happening. And I think it helped all of our communities as time went on. So building up that excitement and getting that interest, get it going, got us off to a good start. So we were running 3 days, a Thursday, a Friday, a Saturday. And on Saturday, excuse me, I think it was on a Friday, they had a number of school groups come, and they were a little overwhelming, we learned. They basically wanted free yardsticks and giveaways that some of the booths had. We had calmed that down in subsequent years. It wasn't quite an appropriate place for exuberant third and fourth graders. It wasn't like going to an outdoor fair. But anyway, that was a growing pain, but we worked through it. It all came out all right. I was really gratified that very first year, during the show, a man named Gus Gilman. He was an important figure in politics in New Hampshire, and he was the commissioner of the Department of Resources and Economic Development, which was the mother organization and mother department of the Division of Forests and Lands. And Gus Gilman came, and he had been undergoing cancer treatment, and he was still kind of frail. He would die within the next year, but he came and he just said, this is the best thing that's happened for forestry and for agriculture that he could think of. We brought this together. We got the people there. We had something to offer, and he just couldn't stop praising our hard work. And his people were really happy to have him come and to hear what he had to say about the work of forests and lands and everybody on his team. So that was good. I remember that very fondly. And we, well, you got to do it again the next year and the next year and the next year. As time went on, what are you going to do for an encore? We keep tuning it up with good educational programming. Try to be a little bit more unconventional at times. I remember we had some interesting seminar type programs on people, how you figure out how you're going to feed round bales if you're set up for the traditional square bale. Well, yeah, a whole bunch of people showed up for that because technology of harvesting hay was changing and people need to get on board. And so, that was really beneficial. And there were many, many other those kinds of things. They were a little bit different, but they were more attuned to really what was happening. And also we had some stuff, we had some, well, you'd call it more consumer focused. And their cooperative extension would step up, Granite State Dairy Promotion, the American Egg Board, they came. Because after a while, we switched from having a banquet in the evening to having a breakfast and giving out some awards. And the American Egg Board came, and they brought all these little cookers, these little grill, no, they were gas-fired hot plates, I guess you'd call them. And they had 25 or 30 of them all set up around in the hall, and had people making their own omelets. I mean, it sounds crazy, but if people had the best time, everybody got into that, 100, 150 people just having a great time. So they were doing the social dimension, and it really pays off. And we tried to do that off and on over the years. As time went on, it seemed like it was better to try, condense a lot of this activity down to 2, because expenses were going on. A lot of the exhibitors, they said, geez, 3 days, it costs us a lot of money to come. Can we do it in 2? Why don't we do it in 2? And that's where it's been ever since. And I guess it's worked out pretty well. Some of the great memories for me are, one of our most loyal and enthusiastic exhibitors down through the years was a guy named Joe Battles. Joe Battles was a hay dealer, and he'd always bring a whole bunch of baled hay and have it all stacked up at his booth. And then he was selling grain too, and he'd have bags of grain. You could sniff the grain and all that kind of thing. Joe was a character. And Joe, after hours, would have a party suite in the hotel. And if you wanted refreshment, you could go up to Joe's suite in the hotel, and there were plenty of refreshments. He became a legend. And at the Vermont show, over the years, he also exhibited. And after a while, they had an award named for the Joe Battles Award. And it was annually given to the exhibitor who left the biggest mess after they pulled out, because Joe would leave a lot of hay chaff on the floor. No problem, but just kind of fun. But I had so many fond memories of seeing that go, and it got up so it could run itself. It just we replenish membership on the board. New folks would come on, get it going. Keep it going, and come in with fresh ideas year after year after year. So it's been so gratifying to see that play out. And here we are now, 38 years, and this COVID pandemic problem, first time we've misfired. I got every confidence that as soon as this passes, we'll be able to pick up the pace again. People look forward to it, put it on their calendars. It's a wonderful institution. And, it's one of those things where a whole bunch of people deserve credit. And I'm so happy that it succeeded. Anyway, I think I've talked long enough. Maybe you've got space here for some questions, or maybe some people got their own memories that maybe they'd like to share. So I guess I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Moderator.
Excellent, Steve. Thank you very much. And we really appreciate all the trails that you've blazed for us. Many of those things we're still doing today, and trying to keep it alive. And it's just such a fantastic show. So hopefully we have some folks in the room here that would love to ask you some questions. Anybody have a question to ask Steve? Just go ahead and unmute yourself.
I don't have a question, but I'd like to point out that Zib Carell is also on the call that Steve mentioned, and I don't want to put her on the spot either, but she might have some memories or thoughts to share as well.
Good. Let's hear from Zib.
I can go with that. You can tell I have a dog in the background now that I've unmuted. Timing was perfect. Yes, very vivid memories of so much of what you shared. And of course, John's on the call, so he could easily add to the mix of discussion. One of the things I recall as of the era was in the late 70s and into the 80s. As a state, we were dealing with a lot of growth going on, and I did a lot of work both with the apple growers and the dairy farmers, and almost all of them were full-time farm people. And they were feeling the pressures of development extensively, and would often speak about the backyard gardeners with a bit of annoyance in that they sort of didn't get it. They didn't get the whole idea of what was involved in farming. They were doing their small efforts and so forth. Yet gradually they began to recognize that they in fact were a logical group to become allies, in that they began to experience the struggle of losing crops and losing chickens or whatever the case may be because of the vagaries of weather and conditions. And so we, in our working with them, kind of pitched the value of embracing that population. And, you know, as all of us through the decades have witnessed, there's a pattern of increased interest in gardening, and then it falls away. And that continues to happen, but now we're seeing the same cycle with small farming. And so as the Expo was built as a concept, we really embraced the idea of going to an urban location. Not that we had a choice, but Manchester became logical from the standpoint of sharing what farm life was about, you know, sharing with that public that thought calves were cute, really what the farmer was working with, and, you know, that farmers care about their land and that they care about their animals and all of that component. And in building the schedule, we adopted early on, after a cycle of years, the understanding that Thursday and Friday daytime was really for the professional farm people in terms of programming, and anybody who was trying to sort of ramp up what they were doing as a farm operation. And then by Friday night, it started to shift to a much more consequential public engagement with both fun activities, contests. I mean, I remember the apple peeling contest, where, you know, the longest apple peel, well, the public hadn't seen that. They may have been doing that up at the Vermont Farm Show for years, but to the Manchester population and the huge consumer public that was coming in, they had never seen anything like an apple peeling contest, and or some form of sheep shearing or that kind of connection. So those as well added to drawing in the public. And everyone who knows Steve knows and marvels at, I'm sure, his phenomenal memory. You know, he'll call me and he'll say, do you remember the guy such and such? Now, when did we, and I'm, you know, going like this. I still do that. I would say, though, I think there may be a little bit of revisionist history that's gone on here in the context of Steve being interviewed by the advisory board to become commissioner. My guess, and I wasn't there, but my guess is that their desire to see the department have a higher profile and kind of ensure more of a public demeanor was more his desire and his idea that he delivered to them. And I would presume, knowing Steve and knowing the multitude of people that he's befriended over the many years back into the college days and his days in the service, I'm suspecting that was his idea that he planted very effectively and that they embraced fully. And it was such a winner that, you know, we've been on this projectile in terms of broadening the message of agriculture and forestry and connecting to the people around that. So kudos to you, Steve. I recognize your humbleness, but I'm sure you get a lot more credit than you're giving.
Thank you. That's very nice. Always a pleasure. Zib was succeeded by Gail McWilliam, now Gail McWilliam Jelly, and we never lost a step. You know, Gail's always got ideas. She's always moving it ahead, and so that's really great. You know, the last show, the one that was held in 2019, went down, and I had the most memorable program. Well, I don't know what you call it. It wasn't really a demonstration, is what you call it. The people from PT Meats up in North Haverhill, they came down with a bunch of hog carcasses, and they cut them up into consumer retail cuts before your eyes, and then be 80, 100 people gathered around watching these butchers in their white frocks and their ultra sharp knives, and just converting what looked like a pig into nice chops and roasts. It was amazing, and it was such fun. And of course, the big hit was at the end, after they demonstrated how they did it, they gave away the pieces of meat, and people walking out with 5-pound roasts and packages of chops and everything. But I mean, that's the kind of thing you won't see at the farm show in Montpelier. Or now it's not in Montpelier, Barrie. It's now up in Essex Junction. They moved to a much bigger venue, or at the main show. So anyway, that's why we've always been different, and been a lot of fun. Yeah.
Fantastic. Does anybody else have some comments or questions for Steve?
John Porter, I got a couple stories.
Good.
One thing I'll never forget on the first one, because the expo was known for having bad weather, and the first one was very cold, and I think it was stormy during the day. And we opened up the trade show for people to bring things, and we had a farmer way up north that manufactured custom-made steel hay wagons. And he hooked that wagon onto his pickup and hauled it clear down to Manchester and backed up to the loading dock with about a 1/4 inch of ice caked onto that whole thing and ice hanging off the fenders. And they brought it in and they chipped off as much as they could. And then they wheeled that thing in and it just dripped everywhere. They put canvases all over it, and we almost got kicked out right on the spot. I don't know if Steve remembers that, but the management was tearing their hair out. It was a brand new varnished floor in the armory with an 8x14 hay wagon dripping water on it. You remember that, Steve? I won't tell the guy's name, but it was quite a sight.
Sure.
Just another quick story, and those on the board will remember this. At the end of the first day, we were still pretty nervous how all this thing was going to go. I remember going to somebody's room up on the top floor, and we all met in their room and sat around on chairs and the bed and everything, and just talked about how we're going to pull this thing off. And at that point, we didn't know if the banquet was going to really sell out. And we actually called agency people and begged them to come the next day and buy a meal to be sure we'd met our quota. And we did, as Steve said. But I remember calling some NRCS people and FSA and say, look, you got to come tomorrow night and buy a meal. I don't know if we're going to make it. So it was pretty tight that first year, but a great experience. I remember the hinges weren't even on the doors yet down there. I remember I held doors for almost all day moving in and all day moving out because they didn't swing right.
And it was so cold, and the armory hadn't been really insulated, you might say, the doorways. And here we are undertaking a show. Of course, all the exhibitors understood what it was going to be like, but a lot of the booths that had nonprofits and some of the staff people, me included, weren't dressed for how cold it was going to be for day long. And the building was not at all ready for that kind of chill. So you would leave the armory area and go out into the conference area, hopeful to get a little more heat on the premises.
I remember plastic hanging from the ceiling, dividing spaces for doorways and so forth. It was clearly still under construction.
It is interesting how selective one's memory is about certain things.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
I think it's marvelous that you could come and tell us about this. I had no idea. I didn't live in New Hampshire then, and it would never have occurred to me that that was the first year of the hotel. You know, this is really just a terrific idea to capture this.
Mm-hmm. You know, over the years, Edie, the expos had to work around the presidential primary every 4 years. The hotel and the facility will say, we've got all these candidates coming in. We've got the Secret Service coming in. They're just basically taking over our building. So we get shoved to a different date. So I think the expo has generally been in February, but once in a while it gets moved to earlier in January, or it gets pushed almost over to March because of all that. But I remember one year we were there, and there was a bunch of guys. There were about 25 of them, young guys. They looked like kind of tough guys. They came walking through and said, "Ooh, wait a minute, who the heck are those guys? Maybe they're on work release from the jail or something." Well, it turns out they were hockey players from the I think the name of the team was the Hamilton, Ontario Lugnuts. And they were there to play the Manchester team that night, but they were being put up in the hotel. They were killing time by going to our show. That was funny. Yeah.
You know, Steve, that reminds me of the year Next Generation coming in, myself and Carrie Putnam. You know, we felt like superstars driving this gigantic Chevy 2500 pickup through the narrow corridors coming in, and, you know, we're waving like we're in a parade. And AJ, who is the chair, we got it parked. And I will never forget, AJ, your freak out, because we showed up, we had just topped off the truck with a full tank of gasoline. And he's right, you can't do this, you can't do this, it's against fire code. And so we had to come over and disconnect our batteries and all sorts of stuff like that, 2 young girls. And I believe it was that same year that they were having in the Armory a heavy metal head banging concert. So all of a sudden, you know, you're in the Farm and Forest Expo on the floor, and you have your usual suspects, and next thing you know, you have people dressed up like Marilyn Manson in boots that are, you know, 2 feet high, black leather, black eyes. And it was just the funniest thing to see. But, you know, we just kept thinking, hey, it's a whole new crowd we can educate, right? But they seem to enjoy it, that's for sure.
AJ, you must have some fun stories to share.
Well, I remember when we ended up buying the back of the hotel because one of our board members was trying to be helpful running the forklift that shouldn't have been. And he drove the forklift through the wall of the hotel. The forks and the staging came out on the other side, and the lady on the other side was not very happy. I might have been out on the board, on the floor with another board member on the tips of the other forklift hanging our banners, with not too many safety regulations in place at the time. And the security guy just came out and he was screaming mad. And the board member that was driving the forklift just got off the forklift and walked away. Wouldn't talk to him or anything else. That was old Hank Peterson. He just walked away and left. And the security guy's like, "Where is he?" I'm like, I don't know. He's just... So I had talked to the hotel, the management that night. I'm like, "Look, we're not leaving. We're not going anywhere. Just give us a cost." So We ended up having to pay that bill for a new wall and everything else. And I think that wall's still damaged in the back of the hotel. But yeah, we've had some interesting stories moving in and out of that hotel.
Wasn't there a year when all the goats got loose too on the expo floor overnight?
Yeah, we had pictures of Gail wrestling some goats. She was carrying on one of her arms, and she went herding some of the animals. We used to have kids sleep in the hotel expo hall overnight if they had the animals that they weren't taken out. And one kid thought it was funny to let the other kids' goats out or something, and that turned into a mess.
But I remember talking with FFA students who really, coming down from the North Country, had no idea the extent and variety of ways to make a living in agriculture and or forestry. To meet someone from the heritage group that worries about endangered species and knows where they are and has the maps, and someone who really is into a topic that they didn't even know existed. That's one of the fun things about the expo, is to see that understanding of young people about how much bigger the world is than they thought.
One year I ran a workshop on trimming goat feet, and we snuck 40 goat legs in from a butcher shop, and we were trimming hooves in one of those fancy rooms.
Well, this has been a very wonderful homecoming and historical review of the 38 years that this wonderful expo has been in place. And again, Steve, we thank you for all the ground that you laid over the years to make it successful. And the board works very hard to honor that and to keep it going. And we're really challenged this year with COVID and not being able to have the live expo, but I think we're working very well together in coming up with new ways to keep in touch and with all of our vendors and our participants, and try to provide a great avenue to get information. And things like this that you're taking part in today is we're recording that, and we'll put it on our new YouTube channel, and trying to make places for people to share and be in touch all year round, not just on expo weekend. That'll be great. And I know we probably have cliques of industries all around the state that stay in contact throughout the year, but a place where we can all come together more often and find the information or the people that we need is something that I'm very much looking forward in putting together this year. So thank you again for your time today, and for all that you've done. And if no one else has any questions or comments, we'll all go and enjoy the rest of our day with a smile on our face.
Thank you. This has been fun.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
See you, Steve.